The Academy has traditionally elected laureates in the fall of each year with the awarding of the Medal of Lincoln at the formal convocation the following spring. I would like to recognize each laureate with us this evening, ask them if they would to please remain standing, and we will applaud them all at the end. Over the years, the distinguished awardees have been chosen from 10 fields of endeavor: agriculture, arts and the performing arts, business, industry and communications, education, government and labor, government and law, labor, medicine and science, religion, social service, and sports. And then starting with our laureates, elected in 1965, the Charter Group, we have Joseph L. Block, industrialist and philanthropist, over at this side of the room. Joseph Block. If you'll remain standing, please. And Ward L. Quall, also elected in 1965. Ward Quall is a communications legend in his own right. Ward Quall. Well, since our discipline is completely broken down on the applause, you might as well continue. That's the way the Academy members respond to me, too. Thank you. Elected in 1967, our special speaker this evening, veteran broadcaster Hugh Downs. In 1967, Irving Kupcinet, author, columnist, TV star, and bridge tender. In 1968, John B. Jack Brickhouse, the nation's great hey man of sports, author, and the product of Peoria, Illinois. Elected in 1972, Dr. Frank E. Vandiver, educator, former president of Rice, North Texas State, and Texas A&M, but only one at a time, now heading a prominent think tank institution in Texas. Dr. Vandiver. In 1974, Attorney Samuel W. Whitwer, who fathered the current Illinois State Constitution and Vice Chancellor of the Academy. Sam Whitwer. Elected in 1975, Louis Goldblatt, a great among business leaders, Louis Goldblatt. In 1977, former Governor William G. Stratton, who has devoted much of his life in distinguished public service, Governor Stratton. Elected in 1977, Epi Lederer, who, as Ann Landers, guides all of our lives, and who is fresh back from the Casbah with the Malcolm Forbes Moroccan adventure. Epi Lederer. Elected in 1978, Dr. Leon Jacobson of the University of Chicago, famed for his medical research in such fields as radiobiology. A misprint, perhaps, but in 1980, John Trutter for volunteer work in social service. Elected in 1982, Thomas R. Mulroy, a former Chancellor of the Academy in the field of law and civic contributions. Tom Mulroy. Elected in 1982, from Danville, Illinois, to the top of the world of great music, Bobby Short. Also in 1982, Ralph G. Newman, noted historian and collector, who has also written the history of this unique organization that is at each person's plate. Ralph Newman. Elected in 1983, Virginia Marmaduke, journalist, a charming journalist, and the Illinois Duchess of the New York World's Fair Illinois Pavilion. In 1983, Arthur C. Nielsen, Jr., a business leader with the highest ratings. Art is probably tired of hearing that kind of introduction, but I thought it was pretty clever. In 1984, Artis Koenig, the crown jewel of the world of opera, who knows how to say no. Elected in 1984, Dr. Hiram Lazar, legal educator and university head from Southern Illinois. Hiram Lazar. Also elected in 1984, Daniel J. Terra, U.S. Ambassador for Cultural Affairs, business leader, and art philanthropist. Ambassador Terra. Elected in 1985, James Beret, international industrialist and Chicago civic leader. Jim Beret. In 1985, Maria Tall Chief Passion, famous, Illinois' famed ballerina and dance authority. Maria Tall Chief Passion. Also in 1985, Dr. Lawrence Rossi, the outstanding medical clinic pioneer from Central Illinois, Dr. Rossi. In 1986, Michael Butler, a founder of the Academy, sportsman, business leader, who literally climbed off of his horse to be with us this evening, Michael Butler. In 1987, Senior Judge Abraham Lincoln Marovitz, historian, judicial expert, and noted humanitarian Judge Abe Marovitz. In 1987, Coach Raymond J. Meyer, the role model for all college coaches. And in 1987 also, Patrick L. O'Malley, business civic leader and international humanitarian. Pat O'Malley. And now getting very much up to date, 1988, elected in 1988, Geraldine Freund, a cultural legend in the world of music and dance, who demonstrated her love for the arts by providing the music for this evening. Geraldine Freund. And my next cue card said, and now for the applause, if you would like to do that in unison. Thank you. Thank you, laureates. 28 of them, and we're very pleased. We're also very happy tonight to have with us Mrs. Delight Morris of Carbondale, who is the wife of the late president of Southern Illinois University, who was a laureate elected in 1981. We're very happy to have Mrs. Morris with us. The Honorable James R. Thompson has been governor of Illinois longer than any other governor. And that also means he has been president of the Lincoln Academy longer than any other president in our quarter-century history. We're very proud of that. He has been most dedicated to our mission and has had a perfect attendance record at all of our major convocations. His comments at our assemblies have been a matter of both pride and history for the Academy. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives us great honor to present the Governor of Illinois and the President of the Academy, James R. Thompson.
Mr. Chancellor, thank you. It gives me a great privilege to be here tonight on the quarter-century celebration of the Lincoln Academy. The Lincoln Academy has meant a great deal to me in the course of my terms as governor of Illinois, both at the annual meeting of the Academy itself and especially at the student convocation where we recognize the best of our future leaders. Very pleased not only that so many of our laureates could be here tonight, but that 4 of our chancellors could be here this evening, beginning with our first. It's probably appropriate to say that Michael Butler is the only chancellor who can still fit into the same tails that he wore the first time that this convocation gathered. The rest of us may have been let out a little. The governor has certainly been let out a little since then, but Michael looks the same as ever, and we're glad you're here tonight. In each of the days that I have served as the governor of this great state, now in my 13th year, privileged to serve longer in that position than any other man in the history of this state, I'm continually struck by the fact that wherever I go in this state, I'm surrounded by a memory, a touch, a remembrance, a word, or a deed of the man for whom this academy is named. In my Springfield office sits the desk at which Abraham Lincoln wrote his first inaugural address. A Victorian shopkeeper's desk with many pigeonholes for accounts and bills and statements and letters, belonging to Abe's brother-in-law, a shopkeeper. And after his election, but before his inauguration, Abraham Lincoln was besieged by the people of Springfield who thought it was wonderful that one of their own would soon be in a position to dispense patronage and jobs. So they constantly accosted Lincoln on the streets of Springfield, and he went into his brother-in-law's store to the back to seek a moment of solitude to begin work on that first address to the nation, which would give some clue or hint or direction as to how he intended to conduct affairs when the rumblings in the South had begun. The nation was beginning to first drift and then tear apart. And I can't pass that desk without understanding the thoughts that must have been going through his mind as he began that most terrible journey to Washington to take up the reins of power at a time when he realized more than anyone the fate of the country was in his hands. And of course, there exists in my office or in the collections abounding in Springfield or in Chicago all the paraphernalia of Lincoln, the campaign ribbons, the buttons. There's one I particularly like in my house in Chicago. It's a tattered badge from an Ohio regiment that served as a bodyguard to Lincoln, whose life in Washington in wartime, close to enemy lines, was constantly in danger. This badge obviously passed down with love and remembrance and reverence through families and through generations. Half of it is gone, the bottom is tattered, but the pride and the determination of those young soldiers who guarded Lincoln, those young soldiers whom Lincoln regarded as family, his young boys, as he called them, still shines through that frayed ribbon. If I go to the old state capitol in Springfield, as I do on occasion from time to time during the year, I remember that Abraham Lincoln worked there. If I go to the old state capitol at Vandalia, I'm reminded that Lincoln took his law license there. As I walk the floors in the mansion in Springfield, I'm reminded that Lincoln was often a guest there and indeed went there in the evenings to help the first Republican governor of Illinois, Governor Bissell, who rarely left the mansion, work on his messages and letters and vetoes. I've gone to the tomb with presidents and with children, and they both do the same thing. They both pause in front of the tomb with the appropriate solemnity. The children don't always understand why. And then they come out front and with one sweeping gesture rub the nose. The children and presidents alike. That's a good sign for America, I think. The children and presidents can reach up and rub the nose. The nose, of course, is worn shiny on that bronze in front of Abe Lincoln's tomb. And at one point, some well-meaning bureaucrat in my administration visited the tomb, saw the shiny nose, the patinaed bronze face behind it, and decided that people shouldn't be allowed to touch Abe Lincoln's nose for luck. And they passed a rule until I heard about it and rescinded the rule, since I've touched the nose more often than any president or child. And I've had some good luck in the last 13 years. In 1987, I was invited to speak on the battlefield at Gettysburg, where Lincoln spoke. To march in the parade, accompanied by fife and drum and colonial costume, Civil War costume, to that great battlefield. Chief Justice Rehnquist spoke there last year on the 125th anniversary of Lincoln's appearance. I suspect that every word uttered on that battlefield since Lincoln's time has been, relatively speaking, inadequate. Mine certainly were. But I cannot describe to the experience of standing on that earth near where Lincoln stood on the anniversary of his deed and words. A mere mortal following an immortal giant on that occasion. During my time in office, I was privileged, in conjunction with Ralph Newman, one of our laureates and one of our founders, to help assure the passage to the people of the state of Illinois of most of the documents relating to Lincoln's home in Springfield. An extraordinary place to which the people of America are most magically drawn. So much so that the home has had to be closed, refurbished, and especially reinforced so that the boards in the floor, which easily bore the weight of Lincoln and his family in their everyday life before he was called to the nation's service, can now more easily bear the weight of millions of feet who want to stand where Lincoln stood, who want to touch where Lincoln touched, who want to somehow identify with that extraordinary person. When I became governor, one extraordinary sight identified with our beloved president was still in private hands: the Lincoln Herndon Law Office. And as you'll recall, when Lincoln was called to the presidency, he told his partner, "Keep the sign up and I'll return." If Lincoln and Herndon was good enough before I became president, Lincoln and Herndon will be good enough after. I'm through with the presidency and have returned to Springfield, which of course he never did. We acquired the Lincoln Herndon Law Office on behalf of the people of Illinois, and now the last great site of Lincoln's venue in Illinois belongs to the people of Illinois, as does Lincoln himself. Sailing the high seas tonight to be commissioned to the service of the people of the United States in just 2 months is a mighty ship, the USS Abraham Lincoln, perhaps the last of the Nimitz-class aircraft carriers ever to be built by this nation. 16,000 people over 4 years have put together this extraordinary ship, 3 football fields long, with a crew of 6,000 plus, larger than most towns in Illinois. 18 stories high, an instrument of war and national defense, an instrument of diplomacy, an extraordinary tribute to the president who, largely forgotten, was the father of our modern Navy. For it was this president who turned the wooden ships into the ironclad fighting ships that won the Civil War by their blockade of southern ports. And I was privileged to stand in the old state capitol where Abraham Lincoln stood and swear in 80 fresh young recruits from the Great Lakes Naval Training Station as the core crew of the USS Abraham Lincoln. And a dedicated group of Illinoisans, under my request, are working assiduously to furnish that mighty vessel, which will command the high seas of this world for the next 40 years. An awesome thought, although there is one small tale of mortality connected with that I must mention. Jane and I went to the launching ceremonies just a little over a year and a half ago. The Navy first launches the ships, takes them out to sea trials for a year or two, and then commissions them, accepts them into the Navy. At the launching ceremonies, Captain Jack D'Antone and I were standing together on the bridge. He has a young daughter about the same age as our Samantha. And he told me he had taken a Lincoln head penny, 2 of them, and placed them in the top of the highest tower on the ship. And he said, this ship will sail the seas for 40 years before the atomic reactor wears down. And then there will be a decommissioning ceremony. And our daughters will be invited to attend that and receive the Lincoln head pennies, which I've placed for you and for me in the topmost part of this ship. I thought, that's very nice. That's wonderful. And then I thought, 40 years, I might not be there. And then I was determined to be there. I said, I'll go back and I'll get on my diet, I'll do my exercise, I'll live a clean, reverential, brave, and healthful life. I'll do everything the doctor says. I just want to be there when my daughter receives the Lincoln head penny from the top of the ship. I'll be 93, but other people have been 93 and gone to ceremonies. George Burns will probably be there. Why can't I be there? He'll be 193. So I'm working on it. So from the desk in my office to the penny on top of that extraordinary ship as she sails the seas and represents America, in the last 13 years in this office that I've been privileged to hold, in this office that I've been privileged to hold. Lincoln has touched me in many ways and will always. And looking at the list of our laureates, those represented here this evening and those who could not be with us but who are listed in your program, reminds us, of course, that we have elected the very best of Illinois. They have all touched our minds, our hearts, our ears, our eyes, our intellect, our emotion. They have done extraordinary things in, around, and for and on behalf of this great state, this quintessential American state. Benjamin Thomas, in his biography of Abraham Lincoln, said simply, "People looked upon Lincoln as embodying the nation's commendable traits. We Americans, like all peoples of the world, have some non-commendable traits. We're human. But we Americans have mostly commendable traits. And the Americans of his time looked upon Lincoln as embodying those traits, which is why they selected him as our president as we entered a great peril. He came," said Thomas, "to be regarded as the true American." Abe Lincoln, as Ralph Newman reminds us in his extraordinary history of this academy, had a somewhat similar thought. He said, "Every man is said to have his peculiar ambition. Whether it be true or not, I can say for one that I have no other so great as that of being truly esteemed by my fellow men, by rendering myself worthy of their esteem." He did. So have those laureates elected in his name. So have all of you gathered in his name. And so shall we all, as the years march on past this quarter century, in this greatest of American states, the state of Illinois. Welcome and good evening.
Thank you very much, Governor Thompson. Another memorable speech in a whole series of memorable speeches before this academy. Our little gathering tonight was arranged by a small committee of our regents and trustees and ably assisted by Judy Barthoff, and we want to thank all of them for their labors in our behalf to make this such a very enjoyable event. But the chairman of that committee is Ernest Wish, who I've asked to introduce our next speaker. Ernie Wish.
These tall people. John, thank you very much. This is a memorable evening, and I can only say to those on the committee a word of public thanks. It is because of their efforts and, of course, your presence that this evening will be so memorable. Thank you all, committee members. Some say that there are no heroes left in America today, that our children rely on TV cop show stars and cartoon characters for leadership roles. Teenagers shun the heroes found in history books, and adults lack a hero in the bleak news of defrocked and deranged TV preachers, money-hungry inside traders, and Colombian drug lords. Well, more than anything else, the Lincoln Academy of Illinois proves that a shortage of heroes is fiction by naming outstanding leaders from our own state. There are heroes to be found, especially in Illinois, and the Academy sees to it that they are recognized here. No other state in our nation has such an honor society. What better mission than to give kids real live heroes they can grow up to emulate? And through its Student Laureate Award program, the Academy recognizes the outstanding young adults who will be future leaders. Over the past 25 years, 140 exceptional women and men in areas including business, the arts, government, education, sports, and religion have received the Order of Lincoln. Many of them are here tonight, including Hugh Downs, one of the most familiar figures in television history and the host of ABC TV's 2020. This year, Mr. Downs celebrates an anniversary of his own, 50 years in television and radio broadcasting. His is a distinguished and pioneering career in the field, 11 years of which were spent right here in Chicago. From 1943 to 1954, Mr. Downs served as announcer and master of ceremony for many radio and TV shows at NBC's WMAQ, including the job of announcing for the popular Kukla, Fran, and Ollie show. Beyond his decade in Chicago, Mr. Downs helped launch The Tonight Show with Jack Paar and served as host of NBC's Today Show for 9 years. For ABC's 2020, he has reported on a range of subjects including medical breakthroughs, illiteracy, and the great white sharks. In 1985, he hosted the documentary Growing Old in America. He has received many awards and honorary degrees for his exemplary work in journalism and is the author of 6 books on subjects including sailing across the Pacific, science, his own career, some fiction, and aging in America. In 1981, he received an Emmy for his work as host of the popular broadcasting service program Over Easy. What better role model for children, adults, the elderly, and would-be journalists than Hugh Downs? His dedication to his profession is matched by few others. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome an Illinois hero and Lincoln Academy laureate who will speak on behalf of all of the laureates, Mr. Hugh Downs.
Thank you, Ernest Wish, for the kind words. I think of something Will Rogers said one time when someone introduced him and spoke glowingly of him. He said, "You know, I wish my parents could have heard that introduction." He said, "My father would have enjoyed it, and my mother would have believed it." Governor Thompson, Chancellor Trotter, fellow laureates, and guests. Being asked to represent and speak on behalf of all 140 individuals who have received this state's highest honor is a privilege and a responsibility that does not rest lightly on my shoulders. It does, however, rest gratifyingly, and I'm pleased beyond expression at the opportunity to attempt this representation. First, I want to salute the Academy itself and those who conceived the idea 25 years ago and brought it into being. It's not only unique, it's successful in what it set out to do. And that is to honor individuals connected with the state whose ideas and actions, in its opinion, have somehow benefited humankind. And in so honoring them, to promote a milieu of honor for all such actions and ideas. You know, the late Robert M. Hutchins, in his efforts to better the educational standards of our country, was fond of saying of the University of Chicago, of which he was president at the time, "It's not a very good university, it's simply the best there is." If I may torture a paraphrase, I would say of the Lincoln Academy of Illinois as an organization, it is a very good organization, and it's the only one there is. The function of the Academy implies that there are ideas, efforts, contributions that have value and deserve recognition. And this is increasingly important in an age where the concept of values has been clouded by such diverse forces as materialism, me-generation narcissism, the technological imperative, and value-free education. This clouding has made us take for granted, or worse, throw away some of our most precious gifts. You know, we were given two divine faculties, and that is intellect and spirit, and it's a crime to waste either. Intellect constitutes a guidance system for all our emotions, and spirit gives us both motivation and capacity to pursue and appreciate knowledge, beauty, wisdom, and virtue. Now, it's a strange thing, but the word virtue, uttered in public in 1989, seems to hang in the air with an aura of corniness. You know, it's no longer mistaken in its Victorian connotation of sexual purity, but it does sound corny, particularly in an atmosphere of value-free learning. I somehow think that we threw out the baby with the bathwater when, on first realizing that it is wrong to tether what we teach to dogma or ideology or partisan politics, that we decided then to establish value-free education so that we wouldn't fall into this trap. But we fell into another trap. We vaulted clear over the saddle and fell on the ground on the other side. We can and should, I believe, keep teaching free of ideological freight or dogmatic religious tenets or the view of any political party. But there are values left that are universal enough to be widely acceptable and important enough to restore to curricula. Who would object to teaching that it's better to be dependable than undependable, better to be responsible for one's own actions, to be kind instead of cruel, to keep promises, to pay debts? There are a host of values that can be transmitted without offense or unfairness. In fact, the very fact that we think we ought to be fair is an endorsement of the value of justice. Value-free learning has tended to undercut our sense of purpose and the bases necessary for cultural security. And that only deepens the eternal riddle: why are we placed on this little planet in the strange labyrinth of life, which seems to grow ever more complex and challenging, and to remain enigmatic both to us as individuals and to successive cultures? We sense the approach of overwhelming challenge, and we wonder sometimes if we might end up like Plato, who, it was said, finally wearying of bloodying his head against the stone wall of logic, came to envy the quiet orthodoxy of Egypt. I think not. I think there's another way out. The eventual stagnation of any orthodoxy calls automatically for innovative thought. And just as innovative thought can be stifled and thwarted by peer disapproval, so can it be encouraged by community recognition and the acknowledgement that intrinsic and universal values are to be cherished. This is what the Lincoln Academy is all about. You know, I often think of what I owe the state of Illinois. Anything that I'm supposed to have done for it or for humankind is in no way equal to what it has done for me. That doesn't mean I'm going to give back my medal, however. It was in Illinois that I met Ruth Shaheen, to whom I've been married for 45 years. Her hometown, incidentally, I'll have to... She may hit me for this after, but I'd like her to stand up for a moment. Some of you did meet her, and I want you to meet Ruth. She comes from a hometown of Tampico, Illinois. Not Tampico, but Tampico. And this is a small town, but it's very famous now, either because my wife grew up there or because Ronald Reagan was born there. I don't know which it is. But it was in Illinois also that I launched my television career. And I don't think that that would have turned out as happily for me as it has had I started in any other location in the nation. It's become a cliche now only because it's true, and it's recognized not just in Illinois but industry-wide that the most innovative and lasting and worthwhile new ideas to be introduced to the medium of television came out of Chicago. There's no doubt about that. I started, incidentally, and I had a kind of an easy time in starting in television because I was already in radio, and I was with the National Broadcasting Company on staff in its central division, the flagship station WMAQ. And I had, in coming to television, I didn't have to quit radio because I had a young family. And there was a chance to learn something about television without diving out of one medium into the other. And it wasn't because NBC went into television, which it did about 1949. It was because there was an experimental station at WBKB in the Loop in Chicago, and I know many here will remember this. Captain Eddy started that. And in 1945, I was asked to do a telecast there. It was a newscast. And I started and had the weird experience of doing the first television program. I broadcast my first television program before I saw my first television program. I didn't have a set. They said at the time there were about 400 sets in greater Chicago, and they were all in bars. So I was broadcasting to a bunch of drunks, I think. But I did this 15-minute newscast, and afterward I said to the producer, I've never seen a television program. And the producer said, we're going to do another one in 45 minutes. They weren't broadcasting continuously. And said if I wanted to stay around, I could see it. So I went out and got a sandwich, came back, and there was a little set in the lobby of the Ballum and Katz Theater, and I watched my first television program after I had broadcasted. But one of the great rewarding things about broadcasting in Illinois, and I think of this incident often, even not in connection with this occasion, but it fits this occasion. I had the privilege, I'll have to digress a moment to tell you, that I've had the privilege of shaking hands with a man who shook hands with Abraham Lincoln and was old enough to know who he was meeting. And when you consider this is 1989 and Lincoln was born in 1809, it'll show you what a span that represents. But I was assigned by NBC to go to Springfield to do a special broadcast on the Lincoln Memorial. And I went down the day before. My wife and I sat in the kitchen of the then curator of the museum, a man named Herbert Wells Fay, and we talked Lincoln lore until late into the night. And I would judge Mr. Fay at that time, maybe I'm off, but I think he was about 80, and he was filled with stories about Lincoln. And at one point I asked him a question which he wasn't able to answer. He said, I don't know. He said, I'd have to ask my father. And he went in another room in the house and brought out his father, who was well over 100, who had met Abraham Lincoln, and was, I guess he was old enough to know, he was 9 or 10 at the time that he met Lincoln. So I have shaken hands with a man who shook hands with Abraham Lincoln, and I cherish that. Tonight I am thinking of some of the laureates no longer with us, some of whom that I have known well or had the privilege of discussing issues with. Buckminster Fuller, Roy Wilkins, Archbishop Sheen, Jack Benny, Adlai Stevenson, Hyman Rickover, Benny Goodman, Mark Van Doren. What a variety and power of contributions to humanity from just this short list. I see many friends among the laureates, and I've met some tonight for the first time. And I'm pretty sure they all think a lot about the problems that we face as individuals, as community members in America, as a nation among nations, and as a species on the planet Earth. To examine a list of our problems is daunting in itself. In environment alone, there are several concerns of extreme importance, ranging from deforestation and pollution and acid rain and ozone depletion, to ecological disruptions whose irreversibility could threaten our very survival. Atomic technology, both peaceful and hostile, still poses a number of threats. And then there is AIDS and drugs and debt and poverty and homelessness and terrorism and hunger and inflation and crime. And over it all, an unexpected numbness that has been interpreted as an erosion of morale. The list is so appallingly long that we can be excused for escaping from it sometimes, from the big picture, and saying, I can't cope with this range of trouble. I will instead do what I can about one problem or one or two problems. But when we focus on one or two, and then begin to glimpse the depth and the complexity of our chosen cause, despair lunges at us from another dimension. Some problems already seem like lost causes. The drug situation, for example. Drug prohibition and interdiction have failed. And while it's possible that massive enough education efforts might dry up a lot of the demand, and then cutting off the supply would be a lot easier. But the money to do this might make the defense budget look small. And getting this appropriated seems about as likely as getting water to run uphill. Now, am I saying that the drug problem is hopelessly out of hand and that humanity is destined to do itself in with chemicals? I am not. I believe that determined people in large numbers can eventually correct these situations. And I believe that determined people in small numbers can show the rest the way. That's one of the differences between disaster and tragedy. You know, if the sun were to become a nova or the earth was coming apart at the core or something, that would be a disaster, and there'd be no way humanity should be blamed for such a disaster. But if we go down the tubes because of something like the drug problem or a number of other human-caused problems, then that would be tragedy, because we can save ourselves from it. I tend to believe we will save ourselves from it. You know, Arnold Toynbee, the historian, toward the end of his career, and he was no mystic, Toynbee said his lifelong study of history had led him to the conclusion that every time the puddle of human affairs was about to congeal completely, the finger of God came down and stirred it. Now, it does seem that we are at times saved in spite of ourselves. And I think it has to do with early efforts and late payoffs. Did you ever tell a small child something important or expose him to some fascinating aspect of life, only to have it bounce off him as though you never even had his attention in the first place? And then years later, you would find, often by his own admission, that what you had said at that time had an enormous influence in shaping his outlook. This is, to me, is why insurmountable problems are eventually surmounted by human action. Even when we're not sure what to do, if we make a beginning, and the effort matures and can pay off in the appropriate way. Now, this may be the warp or the weft of what we perceive as divine intervention. In any case, it is full justification for not sinking into despair. I would say that at this point that help is not only on the way, it's been here all along in the form of will, in the symbiosis of will and intellect, in the encouragement that recognition fosters. For a quarter century now, the Lincoln Academy of Illinois has been in the business of this kind of encouragement. And may I say to the Academy, on behalf of its laureates, a happy 25th anniversary, and I hope that on the occasion of its 50th anniversary, we'll all get together at my house. Thank you very much.
That was surely an invitation we can't resist. Hugh Downs, thank you for a very remarkable response on behalf of our noted laureates. Very appropriate and something we will all remember. We greatly appreciated that you and Ruth came from New York from your very busy TV schedule to join us. Now, to cap things off tonight, we've asked actually 6 of the laureates. The committee has asked to give a toast to the Academy, and I stress that we asked each of them to be quite brief, and we know that they are all used to doing those kinds of things. So we would like, first of all, to have our first chancellor, Michael Butler, give his toast to the organization. Michael?
Well, first I want to thank you all for coming here tonight and for celebrating the 25th anniversary of an organization that had such unusual and interesting beginnings, and many, many people here tonight contributed to that. Ralph Newman has written a wonderful history, a story of the foundation of the Academy, which really pays respect to the individuals who helped put it together and those individuals who are continuing to keep it operating. But listening to what was being said tonight and thinking of what little remarks I might be able to make, I'd just like to say that the Academy is named after Lincoln, who saved the Union. The Academy is really a union of achievement. It's a union of the entire state. It's a gathering of people from all over the state, a gathering of people who very rarely get together except for occasions involving the Academy. And what's maybe even most important, it has become a union of friendships. And there are a lot of very warm friendships and nice happinesses, nice being together that's come from all of us through the Academy. And that I wish to thank you all for and say, let's have another 25 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael Butler. And now a gentleman who, as governor, preceded the formation of the Lincoln Academy, but has been so faithful to us over the years, Governor William G. Stratton.
Thank you very much, Chancellor John, and ladies and gentlemen, guests, fellow members of the Academy. I think we probably witnessed here tonight a historic fact that should not be overlooked. Governors serve longer and are expected to be much taller than they used to be. I also have a companion anecdote to that of our good friend Hugh Downs. I'm one of those who had the privilege of knowing and holding the hand of a man who saw Lincoln. My maternal grandfather was in the Union Army, a youngster, a teenager, before Richmond, just before Richmond fell. Abraham Lincoln reviewed their troop, and as a youngster about 7 or 8 years old, I was enthralled even then by stories about Lincoln by my maternal grandfather. So I claim some connection, I guess, with the Lincoln legend in this state, even though remotely, and my grandfather settled in Wisconsin instead of Illinois. However, he produced my mother, who came down here to teach school, married the president of the school board, my father. So education has advantages, apparently. But I also want to direct one short mention to someone else who's here tonight, Ruth Shaheen Downs. Your brother John was a young and successful public relations man when, as a 25-year-old, I decided to run for Congress the first time. I had no experience at all, so I wrote a 4-page announcement to send out to the press. I showed it to John. He looked at me, and he said, Bill, if you'll cut that to 3 paragraphs, maybe you'll get 2 of them published. And that's the way it worked out, and I learned a lesson at that time. So I owe your late brother John, who was a close friend of mine, some very solid advice. That applies to speeches, too, I suppose. So at this point, I'm going to just make one more statement, and that is, I feel very greatly here tonight this feeling of fellowship. There's a connection with the past, there's a connection with the present, and tonight I want to propose a toast to all those who will be the benefit of the opportunity in this state and this nation and being successful in whatever endeavor they decide to get in, and they will not only advance themselves, but will advance the cause of all the people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor Stratton. And Bobby Short of New York. Bobby?
Thank you very, very much. It's rare that a piano player like myself gets a chance to break his night schedule and come to a dinner party like this. I am honored to be here, and of course I was enormously flattered to be elected laureate in the Lincoln Academy a number of years ago. I stopped living in Illinois in the early 1940s, but I've never really left here. I have family in Danville, and I'm here pretty often these days, it seems. I've not a lot to say. I'd like to congratulate the Academy on its 25th anniversary and to propose a toast to the Academy itself, its membership, and to the extraordinary American for whom it's named. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bobby Short. And Ann Landers, Epi Letterer.
Last week, when John Trotter phoned me and woke me up at 8:45 in the morning. He asked me if I would say a few words tonight, and he said, please keep it brief. So I'm going to say congratulations to the new members. Welcome aboard. It's great to have you. Thank you.
As usual, that was very sound advice, too. Thank you. Irv Cupsonet, the bridge tender. In case you folks from downstate aren't aware, he's the only person I know with a bridge named after him right here, except for Columbus, perhaps.
Thank you, John. First, I'd like to propose a couple of toasts. First, to Genghis Brothers for providing all of these suits that are being worn here tonight. Unfortunately, I got there too late. In going over the toast, I tried to recollect what Abe Lincoln would have said on a similar occasion. Now, Abe was a teetotaler, so he didn't attend many parties where toasts were offered, so it's hard to find a toast delivered by Abe Lincoln. But he came close once. He found himself in an embarrassing position at a party where he was asked to make a toast, and he gave one of the most non-committal toasts ever recorded. He said, "For those of you who like this sort of thing, this is that sort of thing." You, my old friend, I'd like to say that I never shook the hands of anybody who shook the hands of Abe Lincoln. But I once shook the hand of Judge Abraham Lincoln, mayor of it, so we have something in common.